In police museums all over Europe, there are items of evidence that have brought some of the world's worst criminals to justice. Behind every object in these crime museums is a fascinating and sometimes macabre story.
Fibres, like hairs, are often found as part of the transfer of materials, which happens when people make contact with each other. And again, like hairs, they're capable of accurate identification and comparison.
The discovery of fibre fragments on one set of clothing that match the fibre from another is evidence that the two sets have been in contact with each other. Such a find is of considerable importance in cases where a suspect denies any knowledge of or contact with a victim.
This proved to be the case in a murder investigation in the 1960s, where brilliant police detection worked hand in hand with expert forensic fibre analysis.
Just after 8 p.m. on Wednesday, the 7th of February 1968, in Bromley in Kent, 21-year-old Bernard Josephs arrived home. He wondered if Claire, his wife of 5 months, was out, as all the lights were off. At first, everything seemed in order, but in the bedroom, he saw Claire's legs protruding beyond the end of the bed. His beautiful young wife was dead, with a terrible wound across her neck. Detective Superintendent John Cummings was in charge of the police inquiry.
When Bernard Joseph came home and found his wife, he was so distraught that he first of all phoned his own parents, then his wife's parents, both of whom arrived within a quarter of an hour or so. They had milled about there waiting for the GP to come, so any chance of any fingerprints or any other useful clues were destroyed.
But in spite of the initial disruption, over 12 people were present at the scene. John Cummings took note of several clues.
As you entered the flat, the kitchen was to the right. The mixing bowl and all the soufflé things were all there, ready to be made. There was also a cup of coffee and a plate of biscuits. In the hallway leading from the kitchen, there was one slipper, and in the corner by the bedroom, a blood-stained handkerchief.
No murder weapon was found at the scene, but the next morning, a bread knife with a serrated blade was found to be missing from the kitchen.
A post-mortem found that there were 14 stab wounds to the neck, one of which had penetrated right through to the spine. Analysis of the knife wound suggested a knife with a serrated edge, and indeed the defence wounds on her hands also showed that there was a serrated pattern consistent with the bread knife. The pathologist looked at the neck and also found marks around the neck suggestive of constriction of the neck, with a degree of asphyxia at or shortly before death. There was no evidence of a sexual assault, and the time of death was given as approximately 7:15 p.m.
Cummings began to piece together Claire's movements that evening. Her mother-in-law confirmed that she'd spoken to Claire about 5:45 in the evening, discussing how to make a lemon soufflé. It appeared that Claire had begun to make the soufflé. The machine was set on mix, but had been turned off at the wall.
There was no forcible entry, so it strengthened my opinion that somebody had called, interrupted her cooking, but it was somebody not too familiar with her, but at least had met her, perhaps in the past.
Cummings believed that while in the kitchen, this visitor became too friendly, whereupon Claire ran to the bedroom. Her assailant caught her by the throat, causing her to lose consciousness. He then went back to the kitchen, where he took a bread knife and savagely attacked her.
She was a girl who kept all the letters, wedding anniversary, invitations.
And it was one of these that showed that a former workmate had been married to Roger Payne. Claire and her mother had been at the wedding.
On the 12th of February, as a matter of routine, B.S. Cummings sent a detective to interview Payne at his workplace. The detective was immediately struck by numerous scratches on Payne's hands and a bruise on his forehead. A routine check on Payne revealed that he had a criminal record.
Payne explained the scratches on his hands as being the result of a fight he had with his wife on February the 4th, 3 days before the murder.
On the day Claire Joseph was killed, Payne had to appear in London for a work-related medical examination. He stated that he left work at 11:30 that morning, changed into a newly pressed suit straight from the cleaners, and then drove to London in his Morris 1100.
After his interview, he visited a friend, arriving at 4:20 and leaving about 6. He bought himself some fish and chips before driving to his mother's. He explained the bruise on his head by saying that his car broke down and that while he was mending it, the bonnet fell on him and knocked his face onto the battery terminal. He stated that he reached his mother's about 7 and stayed there until about 7:50. He said that his car broke down again on his way home. He cleaned the distributor's cap and got it going. He stated that he got home at about 9:15. He took his suit, stained, he said, with the mud from the car breakdowns, to the cleaners the next morning.
With lightning detective work, DS Cummings sent officers out to check on each part of Roger Payne's statement, even as he was making it at the police station.
Everyone acknowledged meeting Payne, but they put the times that they'd seen him at about half an hour earlier than he said. Time of death had been put about 7:15, but no exact time had been released to the press. Interestingly, during his interview, when told that they would question his wife,
he said, "Well, it's no good you going to see her. She doesn't know where I was at 7 o'clock that night."
Payne had admitted seeing the Josephs' flat some weeks before, on the 7th of January, when he had gone to pick up his wife, after she had spent the evening with Claire and some other friends. He was able to describe the flat, which he said Claire had shown him around, but John Cummings needed something that would establish that Roger Payne had been at Claire Joseph's flat on the night of the crime. 6 days after the murder, Payne attended Bromley Police Station. His hands were examined by a doctor who stated that, in her opinion, the marks on his thumbs were consistent with bite marks and were less than a week old. These were therefore caused after the 4th of February, the night on which Payne quarrelled with his wife. The doctor also ruled out that these injuries could have been caused by the impact of a car bonnet. There was no fingerprint evidence at the Josephs' flat, but John Cummings hoped that fibres from the murderer's clothes might have been transferred to Claire Joseph's garments. Margaret Pereira was the principal scientific officer at the Metropolitan Police Forensic Science Laboratory.
Examination started to look for fibres from the suspect's clothing, Payne, on the clothing of Claire Joseph, the deceased. This was quite laborious work because both his overcoat and his suit were multicoloured fibres, and so it meant many hours of searching, and a number of fibres were found which could have come from his clothing. The dress helped me enormously because it was very fluffy, and brightly fluorescent, and some red wool fibres, brightly fluorescent, were found on his hat and his overcoat.
Fibres were also found on a blood-stained handkerchief that had been left at the scene. Cummings now felt that he had enough scientific evidence to make an arrest, and on the 24th of February, Payne was formally charged. His house was also searched, and a number of handkerchiefs, ties and a scarf were removed.
The police brought to the laboratory a frayed scarf. It had very frayed edges, and on it were a number of fibres matching the dress again, and these fibres matched up with both the sets of fibres that I'd found on the individual clothing, so this was extremely important.
A matching fibre from this scarf was also found under Claire's left thumbnail. More analysis of Payne's clothing revealed a total of 61 fibres matching Claire's dress on his overcoat, 22 on his hat, and 6 on his jacket. The suit had been cleaned and the fibres were embedded in the cloth. It was established that this exchange of fibres could not have occurred when Payne had previously met Claire. Claire's husband explained that the cerise dress was at the time of the visit packed away. Margaret Pereira had recently made an important breakthrough in a new type of blood group identification, a system that made it possible to analyse a mere pinhead-sized bloodstain. She examined Payne's car for blood.
It happened to be the same model of car as I was driving myself. I felt I knew exactly where to look if a blood-stained knife had been taken from the house, and I would have popped it into the side pocket of the car. And the first thing I did was to strip off that side pocket and managed to find, right in the seams, sufficient blood to be able to carry out grouping tests.
Tests showed that the bloodstains were the same type as Claire Joseph's. She had a very rare blood group, common only to about 1.5% of the population. Fibres matching the cerise wool dress were also discovered in the car.
Almost as an afterthought, I cleaned out the footwell mats and found a few fibres matching the carpet from the deceased's bedroom, a nylon carpet.
Roger Payne stood trial at the Old Bailey and on the 24th of May 1968 was found guilty of Claire Joseph's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment.
Methods of examining fibres are similar to those used for hair. Just like hair, characteristics include size, colour, firmness and coarseness. In our next crime, known as the case of the blue serge suit, fabric embedded with minute grains of sand and a single-inch long strand of silk provided the evidence that helped to identify our killer.
On the evening of Sunday the 11th of April 1937, a young woman by the name of Ruby Keane attended a service at a local church near Leighton Buzzard in Bedfordshire. Ruby was 23, attractive and vivacious. She was looking forward to a summer wedding to a local policeman. But hours later, Ruby was found dead in a local lover's lane, just 300 yards from her home.
Well, Ruby Keane, she was my great-aunt on my grandfather's side of the family. By all accounts, she was a very vivacious type of person, and certainly she was someone that very much enjoyed life. Very, very well liked, a little bit of a rebel in her, but very, very tragic in the way that her life ended.
Her body was found just after 6 a.m. by a railway employee on his way to work. He was transfixed by the image before him. The young woman lay right in the middle of the path. Although most of her clothing had been torn off, she was still wearing her gloves, and her arms were in the sleeves of her coat. When the police arrived, Ruby's body was quickly identified. She was well known in the area and lived in a nearby cottage with her family. Ruby's fiancé was local police officer Patrick Smith.
When questioned, Ruby's fiancé stated that he had seen her on the afternoon of the day she was murdered, but had then gone on duty in a nearby village.
In 1937, I was nearly 10 and I lived at the police station. Well, my father was a senior officer in the investigation. One of the reasons that my father asked for Scotland Yard to be involved was because the boyfriend was a policeman. It was felt that it was need to have some sort of objective view.
When Sir Bernard Spilsbury carried out the post-mortem on Ruby Keane, he found that she had been involved in a violent struggle. The nose had received a serious blow and there were scratches on the body, but there was no evidence of sexual assault. The cause of death was asphyxiation due to the black and white scarf round her neck. He thought that the time of death was around 10:30 p.m. the previous night.
Leighton Buzzard police made house-to-house inquiries in the streets nearest to the lane, hoping to trace Ruby's last known movements. They found one witness who had seen a man and a woman, and he knew the girl to be Ruby, leaving the town in the direction of the Firs. Another witness said that he had seen a girl whom he didn't know, and a man, a local lad, named Leslie Stone, walking in that direction.
The police were already aware of Stone's existence. He had contacted them himself to make a statement in connection with Ruby's murder. Leslie Stone was 24 and working as a builder's labourer. In his statement, he explained that he had known Ruby off and on for years, and that the previous night he had met her at a pub where they drank and talked until about 10 to 10. Stone stated that he had started to walk her home, leaving her at a fork in the road at about 10:15. He said that he had reached home at about 10:45, but a policeman remembered seeing him at 10 to 11, putting the time that he would have got home at the later time of 11 o'clock.
I can remember my father at supper, I think it was, having talked to Stone, saying to my mother, "I'm sure he's the man." And that was bearing in mind only 12 hours after they'd discovered the body.
Stone was now a suspect and was held in police custody.
I remember seeing him standing there in dark trousers, a white shirt and slippers. I remember seeing him there, and I thought, looking back, he looked rather dishevelled and rather pathetic, I thought.
But detectives had also taken a statement from a married couple who had walked home that evening through the Firs. They said that they had seen Ruby in the arms of a man whom they swore was a policeman, because he'd been wearing what appeared to be a dark blue uniform.
Detectives looked to the murder scene for clues. The ground where Ruby Keane had fallen had been scuffed up, but several footprints were just about discernible. What looked like knee prints could also be made out. A police technician made plaster casts of all the indentations.
Well, I actually saw the plaster cast. It was the first time I'd ever seen them. I mean, they did some footprints, and there were some knee prints between the girl's legs.
When Sir Bernard Spilsbury examined the cast of the knee, he found that there was a trouser crease and also the weave of the material. He knew as well that any sand from the lane would have been transferred to the trouser and would form important contact traces with regard to the murderer.
At the police station, Stone was wearing his labourer's clothes. He told detectives on the Sunday night he'd been wearing his suit. Concerned that the sighting by two witnesses of Ruby in the arms of a man who had been wearing what appeared to be a dark blue uniform implicated the policeman with whom Ruby had been involved, the detectives asked Leslie Stone to submit for examination the clothing that they'd been wearing on the night of the murder.
When Spilsbury inspected the trousers of Stone's blue serge suit, the warp and weft of the cloth showed up like a large mesh neck curtain. He saw tiny granules of gold between the mesh, specks of golden sandy soil.
Now, Leighton Buzzard is very, very famous for sand in different parts of the town, different sands, but very, very unique.
More soil was found in the creases and the turn-ups of the trousers. The sand exactly matched that from the murder scene. And Stone had admitted that the suit was new and had never been worn before Sunday night, eliminating any claim that he may have got the soil on his trousers on an earlier occasion. And though they were brand new, the trousers had been brushed vigorously on the knees so hard that the nap had almost been worn away. Then came another breakthrough. A single fibre was found embedded in the lining of Stone's jacket. It exactly matched the fibres from the cream underslip that Ruby had been wearing on the night she died.
My father charged him with murder at 4:25 on the second day of the inquiry.
Stone's trial began at the Old Bailey on the 2nd of June. He pleaded not guilty, but the prosecution presented a solid case against him.
At the trial, one witness described overhearing Stone pleading with Ruby to discard her fiancé and marry him instead, and bit by bit, a picture was painted of the relationship between the couple. Stone had been in the army and in 1932 was posted to China, where he served for the next 4 years.
Stone and Ruby wrote to each other, but after a while, Ruby's letters stopped.
Stone had it in his head that he was coming back to Leighton Buzzard. He was coming back to Ruby. But, of course, Ruby had gone off and made a new life for herself.
He stuck with his original story right up to the trial, but in the witness box, he admitted that he had walked with Ruby along the Lover's Lane. They had talked and kissed, but at some point, an incident some years earlier was mentioned. Stone said that Ruby had suddenly changed. He said, "She called me a dirty devil and hit me on the side of the head. I was surprised. It made me jump at her. I caught hold of her scarf. I think I pulled it. I think I knotted it again after that." He didn't mention how she came to have scratches on her body or sandy soil in her hair and her ears. Following this statement, Stone's counsel addressed the jury, hoping that they would find him guilty of manslaughter rather than murder. The jury retired, but after only 25 minutes returned with a question. The foreman asked the judge, if, as a result of an intention to commit rape, the girl was killed, although there was no intention to kill her, is the man guilty of murder? The judge answered, yes, undoubtedly. The jury mirrored the general belief that Stone had struck Ruby down when she rebuffed his advances, strangling her with her scarf so as to aid a sexual assault. After only a moment's consultation with the jury, the foreman declared they have found Leslie George Stone guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death. An appeal was lodged on Stone's behalf on the grounds that the judge's answer, yes, undoubtedly, to the jury's question, was a misdirection in law. But the appeal failed. He was executed at Pentonville Prison in London on August the 13th, 1937.
He obviously had no firm intention of killing her. I think one thing led to another, and something snapped. She'd been beaten about the head, there was blood from her nose and from the side of her face. It was a very, very violent attack.
In these days of DNA evidence, it's easy to forget the importance of fibre analysis. But as these two cases have shown, it can be of enormous value. Whether, as in the Payne case, it involves an array of distinctive fibres, or as in the Stone case, just one incriminating silky thread.